President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement on the ban of alcohol caused a stir on social media. Many have been debating whether business owners deserve sufficient notice before the ban was announced. To help us understand the reinstatement of the alcohol ban, we are joined now by Professor Elmien du Plessis from the Northwest University. Professor Elmien, good evening and thank you for your time. Got a new regulation, Regulation 44 subsection 1, that is causing so much stir. Good reason for this regulation, you think?
Well, they have been saying for a while now that we can move up and down in different stages. So luckily we didn't move down to stages 4, and that was always on the back burner. And I think from a legal perspective, it is always possible to ban alcohol in terms of the Disaster Management Act. So from where I stand, this is a total legal move on the part of the government. We can have conversations on whether there should have been consultation beforehand or not. It is not a strict legal requirement. But yes, it's a totally, the reasons that they give, and we've seen in the court cases that we've heard the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, months, that the courts don't readily interfere with the decision of the executive in these things if there's a plausible reason for this. And the reason that they say, I see on the one hand, Mkhize says it's because people are contracting the virus more when they drink, and on the other hand, of course, it's the fact that the trauma rooms in the hospitals fill up very quickly once the alcohol ban was lifted. So there are good reasons for the ban. The question is just, whether the way that it was done installs confidence. I think that's a very important question to ask as well, whether we as the people have confidence in our leaders to make decisions for us when we're not involved in this decision making. And then, of course, we want to know, did they take into account the effect that this might have, for instance, on traders, on people who make alcohol, on the economy, etc. So I, for one, am not so alarmed about this, but I do understand the concern, and I do understand that there might be economic impacts that we're not sure how that was taken into account and if it was taken into account.
Some political parties like to believe government is punishing citizens for their failures to upgrade the health system in the last 100 days or so when we were on lockdown level 5 as they were preparing for this surge.
I don't like the word punishment citizens. I do think there are really valid reasons. If you look, for instance, many of my doctor friends say this is a very welcome move. So people who are in the forefront, they really welcome this move. There are good reasons to ban alcohol in terms of the management of the hospital. So I don't think it's a punishment for us. On the other hand, I was thinking today, maybe if in the past decade or so we didn't give attention to the alcohol problems that we have in this country, this is some of the consequences that you have, because we really do have problems with alcohol in this country. And in a time of crisis, you don't have the luxury to deal with it in a nuanced way. So I think for me, as long as this ban is not permanent, from what I understand, from what government is saying, they say they're going to try things 2 weeks at a time, a month at a time, so I don't know how long this will carry on. But as long as it's not a permanent thing, I think, and as long as we are in the peak, especially here in Gauteng, I think there are valid reasons, and it is a legal move as well to ban alcohol.
Speaking of the peak, do you think government was maybe too hasty to put the ban when we're still on lockdown level 5, to later, yes, when numbers were peaking, actually release the ban, and now they want to reinstate it again, hence the anger from the people?
I think that is a very good conversation to have, because in lockdown level 5 we didn't have a peak, we didn't have this problem with the hospitals being overburdened. So we can question the validity of the alcohol ban in lockdown level 5, but I think we must also remember there's also a lot of studies that show that domestic violence, once there's alcohol involved, domestic violence go up, and if you're locked down in a house with somebody that's drinking alcohol, and there are studies that show that domestic violence go up, that I'm not sure what exactly the reason was in the lockdown level 5. It was also the reason of the trauma, but that might have been one of the reasons why they banned alcohols. But I think the ban in level 5 made less sense than the ban does now in level 3, while we are looking at the surge of cases in Gauteng.
Many people worried about this. The Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs saying earlier on today in the briefing, this is not government limiting people's rights. Is it really, though?
Well, the question is, what is the right that you have? Do you have a right to drink? You might have a right to make decisions about your body, and in Section 1 of our Constitution you have freedom, the right to freedom. So you might have the right of the freedom to choose and to make your own bad decisions. So in a sense that is limiting some kind of right, but I think we must also think differently about this. There are different rights that we have to balance here. So you have that freedom to choose, to do what you want, your bodily integrity, and then you have the rights that others have to health care, etc. And these rights all come together and you have to balance them, and they must balance some way. So I think in that pool I will also put the right, for instance, to access to food, which is indirectly tackled if people don't have work and the economy fails. So I think there's a myriad of things that government must take into account. And what I would like to know is how do they balance this and what did they take into account? But in the end, the decision to ban the alcohol is a policy decision. And as long as there's a rational connection between that decision, then it's in law a valid reason. So I think some of these contestations are probably rather more policy or political contestations than they would be in terms of law.
So we're talking about prioritizing life and safeguarding livelihoods, and
yes.
Whether or not, when you are trying to attempt that balance, citizens have a right to ignore the rule of law, and who does it apply to at that time?
So I think, for me, the rule of law is such an encompassing concept. We have now reduced it to legality and a rationality test, whether these laws are rational. But actually, there's also a section in the rule of law that say that citizens must obey laws. And I think that includes that you must obey laws, even if you don't agree with it, because you've got avenues to tackle the laws if you don't agree with it. So this is a very interesting phenomenon, because I've been also keeping an eye on what happens in American courts and in German courts, and in all three of these jurisdictions, and I'm sure in the other jurisdictions it will be similar. The government was lax to interfere into the decisions of the executive, because they said they don't have all the information in front of them, and this is a crisis situation, so they're just going to check that when it infringes on certain fundamental rights, that it is done in a way that's acceptable, because you can limit fundamental rights, or if it's about policy decisions, whether it's rational. So I think this is restricted to the pandemic, or I would hope so. I would be more upset in normal times if courts defer so much to the decision of the executive. But I think also, during a time of crisis, this thing must be managed. And it's been shown also by various studies that people make really poor decisions in a time of crisis, and that the way to curb that is to get a lot of experts and a lot of different people around the table to get together to make rules. And I would hope, and from what I see, that there is some sort of consultation happening. We're not always privy to it, and it's not always explained to us, but from what I understand, they do harness in a lot of experts when they make decisions.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I feel, when the government in this time of the pandemic makes certain decisions, it's extremely difficult for us to trust them, especially when the Zondo Commission is also going on. But I think, it is not unreasonable for the courts to defer some of that to the executive, and to just make sure that, the basics are intact.